Hello and welcome everyone to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Hope you all had a wonderful, relaxing weekend, but we are back to talk some fantasy sports this week with some all-new content. Today should be a great show. Today we're going to be talking about IDP leagues. They make their triumphant return in terms of rankings. We're also going to talk about the Eastern Conference representative in our Stanley Cup Finals, the Florida Panthers, their path to the finals, their fantasy success this season, and we're also going to talk a little bit more about fantasy college football. I know you guys kind of been tuning into that, so we're going to be talking about our breakout players for next season, who I think are the next stars of the fantasy college football season next year. But before we get into all that, I do ask that you always like, follow, and subscribe to the show. We do get a lot of tips, donations, comments, concerns, questions. So please, if you have any of those, leave them at the link gsmc.cloud. It helps the network a lot. It helps me, my fellow podcasters. So do please consider doing that. So without further ado, let us get right into the show, starting off with the IDP rankings making their triumphant return. We transition from the stars of the IDP leagues to the rookies, the next stars, the next faces of these defenses. And we start off with the D-line, one of the deepest D-line classes we have had in recent memory. There should be some very enthralling players on this list. I think that there's a wide variation of different teams, different conferences, so it should be a very exciting rankings. As always, I am going to pull up my graphic right here and get right into it, starting off at number 10, someone who I think has one of the better situations in this rankings, with Jonah Elliss out of Utah. Let's just talk about his last season as a collegiate athlete. He was a Pac-12 honorable mention over at Utah. 26 tackles, solo tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. And he goes to a Denver Broncos team that really has more mid-level linebackers. Right now, he's currently sitting at a second stringer. He's behind guys such as Alex Singleton and Cody Barton, who are kind of developing themselves as well. So it should be really intriguing to see if Jonah Elliss can step into the rotation, because of the fact that he's sitting behind 2 guys that haven't fully developed yet. So I'm really looking for Jonah Elliss to be kind of one of those breakout stars for the Denver Broncos defense. Obviously, a defense that went from last year being one of the statistically worst defenses of the league. Obviously, they had that devastatingly poor performance against the Miami Dolphins, if anyone remembers that. And then in the latter half of the season, we saw some major improvements from them. So look for Jonah Elliss to be fully integrated into this Denver Broncos squad as a nice rotational piece for your IDP team. Coming in at the number 9 spot, another kind of interesting prospect. He came out of Western Michigan, not necessarily a school known for producing these kind of players. Marshawn Kneeland, he goes to a Dallas defense that is rife with talent, so we'll have to see how he steps into that rotation. But speaking of his stats, in his career at WMU, he had 149 tackles, 12 and a half sacks. He had a pretty good combine as well, 4.75 40, 35.5-inch vertical. So I'm looking for Marshawn Kneeland to not step into a D-line in Dallas that is already there, one of the better defensive lines in the league. You have guys like DeMarcus Lawrence, and obviously the do-it-all linebacker behind him in Micah Parsons. But I think this is a fantastic pick, the 56th overall, good value for him at this position. And I think he's going to be one of those prospects that, while not starting right away, you do expect him to come along. Dallas is very good at developing these young D-line prospects, so I'm really excited to see not what he does this year, but perhaps next year and in the next 5 years as he's integrated into their D-line rotation. Coming in at number 8, another very exciting player in Chris Braswell of Alabama. Last year, he moves to a Tampa Bay defense who, in my opinion, is going to quickly move up the fantasy rankings in your traditional dynasty league or PPR league, whatever league you play. But Chris Braswell is an excellent addition for your IDP team. I think he's someone who's going to be in the rotation right away. Obviously, the Bucks have so much talent at every level of their defense. But this is a guy who has fantastic combine, 4.6 40, 33.5-inch vertical. And last year at Alabama, he had 11 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, and a forced fumble last year. So look for Chris Braswell to move into a Bucks defense that is more known for the back end and their defensive front, but is going to grow and develop drastically. They lose Shaquille Barrett, so they need new faces to step up. I think you have guys like Yaya Diaby and Joe Tryon Shoyinka who are going to become the next faces, but in about 3 or so years, give Chris Braswell time to learn from these younger talents and grow as well. So I'm really intrigued to see how Chris Braswell develops in a defense that will be developing along with him. So this is a very exciting ranking for Chris. Coming in at the number 7 position, a guy who I feel like is heavily underestimated right now in terms of this rookie D-line class. He had a fantastic combine, tested very well, Braden Fisk, but I think it's the fact that he's on an LA Rams defense that is trying to find their new Aaron Donald, and they already have 2 guys in front of him and someone else on this list coming up next who I feel will be more involved in this defense. However, I don't think that Braden Fisk will really suffer from it early on in his career. I think he will get the chance because he did test very well at the combine. 4.7 40, 33.5-inch vertical. So you can see the talent, the traits are there. I think he had a fantastic year at Florida State last year, partnered with the guy coming up in these rankings and who will be one of his running mates in this young LA Rams defensive front. But ultimately, right now, Kobe Turner and Byron Young, they already have that 1 year in the league where they stepped into a defense that is looking to evolve post Aaron Donald. So we'll have to see if Braden Fisk is part of those plans. Right now, I do see him as kind of more a second string type of player right now. But ultimately, I'm really excited to see how him and his new teammate who is joining him from Florida State and is later in this rankings. I just gave you a very big hint as to who that is. But overall, this LA defense, look out for them and look out for Braden Fisk's name to come up a lot in the very near future. Coming up at the number 6 level, we have a very exciting young player out of Penn State, the 21st overall pick in the draft, going to the Miami Dolphins, who also added a lot of depth up front and is returning some injured depth to that position group. The Chop Robinson man. 4.48 40 in the combine, 34.5-inch vertical. Last year, his last collegiate year at Penn State University, he had 26 tackles, 5.5 sacks. So you can see the fact that this is a very nice developmental, high ceiling kind of athlete that Miami gets, but he will have a lot of competition in this Miami D front. You have a guy coming in Shaq Barrett who has already proved he can produce in Tampa. You are bringing back Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips from injuries, and you have a guy in Jalen Ramsey in your back end who is a star in this league. Chop Robinson will be looking to try to find his way in this Miami defense. I don't think he will be integrated immediately like some of these players, but look for him to be a nice player maybe a couple years down the road, and this is a very decent ranking for him at the moment. So yes, coming in at number 5 overall, another Robinson out of Missouri, going to an Arizona team where I definitely think he will play because they are not as deep as some of the other teams on this list defensively. Darius Robinson at the combine, he had a very good combine, number 27 overall pick. 4.45 40, 35-inch vert last year at Mizzou, 35 tackles, 3.5 sacks. So you can see Darius Robinson. I think this is a very astute pick from a Cardinals defense that is trying to add more depth. They are one of the worst teams in the league and it is seen in their defense. They have some players who they're trying to build around, but not necessarily in the D-line. They have guys like Budda Baker and Sean Murphy-Bunting, but obviously those are two D-backs. They need depth up front, and Darius Robinson is sure to add that. He's currently probably their best D-lineman right now. They have some kind of mid-level pieces that they're trying to piece together to try and salvage a defense they're trying to create. But overall, Darius Robinson immediately becomes one of the better Arizona Cardinals defensive players. And I think that he will be a very wise pick if you're looking for a steal in an IDP league. Coming in at number 4, one of my favorite defensive players in the class, mainly because he's one of the only D tackles on this list, and mainly because he will really rejuvenate my favorite team's defense right behind me. Go Hawks. Byron Murphy II over there at Texas, another one of my favorite teams. Interestingly enough, the second defensive player picked in this draft, he is a fantastic player. Obviously, the stats do not reflect it because of the fact he is in the interior, but his measurables at the combine are pretty extraordinary for a guy of his size and his abilities. 4'8", 40, 33-inch vertical, not too shabby for him. Last year, with his partnership with Devondre Sweat, he was the Big 12 D-Lineman of the Year there. I really am intrigued to see how Mike Macdonald uses him. Obviously, Seattle is known for picking these high-end defensive players in the draft, but never have they drafted someone as high as Byron Murphy. So I'm really intrigued to see how the first defensive pick post-Carroll will develop with a defensive-minded coach who really wants to add him to this kind of new base defense for Seattle. At the 16th position in the draft, I think he's a really high-value pick. He's not necessarily going to get you that sack production, but look for him to get some TFLs in the run game because he is immense in that department. I think he could prove to be another steal like Darius Robinson before him for a Seattle defense that obviously wants to get better, but is still in that phase where they really have to find out what they have in Mike Macdonald. Coming at the number 3 position, the player picked before Byron Murphy. At number 15, the first defensive player off the board in Laiatu Latu. I really like Laiatu Latu, but there are concerns about his health. Obviously, he had to medically retire when he was still at Washington due to a neck injury. He transfers to UCLA, plays again, becomes one of the best defensive players in college football. And I really like that the Indianapolis Colts took a flyer on this kid. I really love what he did at UCLA. Last year, he had 15 sacks. At the combine, he had 4'6", 440, 32-inch vertical. I really love Laiatu Latu as a player. If he's healthy, I think that he will step right into an Indianapolis Colts defense that is eager to get better. They have some players we've talked about on the show in the linebacking core, and Zaire Franklin, EJ Speed becoming new faces. And he's going to learn from guys like DeForest Buckner up front. So I'm really excited and enthralled to see how Laiatu Latu, a player who, when healthy, really has that high-end production coming through with the Indianapolis Colts. I really think this was a huge pick for the Colts and could be a huge pick for you guys in an IDP league. Coming in at number 2, the guy who is going to partner with Braden Fisk, a fellow Florida State alum. Jared Verse moving as well as Braden Fisk to the LA Rams, becoming another one of those guys who they're looking at to become the next quote-unquote Aaron Donald. I really don't think that Aaron Donald can be replaced, but they're definitely going to try, and Jared Verse is one of those players who will be tasked with doing that. At Florida State last year, he had 18 solo tackles, 17 TFLs, and 9 sacks in his senior year. 4'5", 40, 35-inch vert at the combine. One of the freak athletes in that Florida State D front last year. Incredible player. 19th overall to LA. In all reality, I really don't think that the LA Rams will truly replace a player of Aaron Donald's caliber, but Jared Verse is definitely a very interesting high-end value pick in this draft. I think that at Florida State, he was the face of that defense. He was the leader and heartbeat of that defense, and he will be tasked with doing that. for the LA Rams in a very transitional phase for them. They already have certain players who they've looked at before, but Jared Verse comes in to kind of make that transition easier for them. But he's not number one in these rankings, and I really like who this number one player is, and that is Dallas Turner. What a bad man he is, moving to a Minnesota team that is losing a lot of production up front. I really think this is a huge value pick. Could be a fantastic steal for Minnesota if he develops right. Last year for Alabama, he was an SEC Defensive Player of the Year. At the Combine, tested really well. 4.4 640, 40.5-inch vertical. So you can see the untapped potential that a player like Dallas Turner has, and he moves into one of the best situations on this list. In a Minnesota Vikings team that lost a lot of production up front, like I said, they lose guys like DJ Wonnum, they lose Dalvin Tomlinson. So Dallas Turner has a chance to become one of the better players on this Minnesota defensive front. He's going to learn from a guy in Jonathan Greenard, who they brought in from the Houston Texans, who is another player who is quickly becoming one of the better defensive ends in this league. So it should be very intriguing to see how Dallas Turner is integrated into that Minnesota Vikings system. But that should just about do it for this segment of the show. I was really excited to look at this D-line class, one of the deepest in this class for rookies. But coming up next on the show, we are going to look at the NHL, where I'm going to be talking about the Florida Panthers and what it took for them to get to the Stanley Cup Finals, both in this series and kind of as a whole and during the season. And also I'm going to be looking at some fantasy breakout players for them that help them along their journey. So it should be a very, very, very interesting segment. We will be right back to talk about that.